Happy Wednesday, everybody. I want to thank Key, American University's Key program. I'm a proud ambassador, graduate of Key cohort 43. So anytime I get the opportunity to come back and serve, it excites me. So thank you, Lamont, director Patrick Malone, would be the most perfect person in the world if it wasn't for the fact he was a Dallas Cowboys fan, and the incandescent Jennifer Tether, who's always in the background somewhere. When Key asked me to do this event, a lot of talk right now is focusing on the future of work. And that type of conversation has been going on for a while. But when you look at what we experienced last year with the impact of COVID, the pandemic, some of the social justice challenges that we as a country are still facing today, and the fact that we just have become this hyper political partisan environment, I think that also impacts the future of work. But this really hit home. My oldest son is a graduate of the University of Oklahoma, and his best friend from college came to American after he graduated from Oklahoma and got a master's in international studies. And he's now part of the State Department of Foreign Services. And he came to see us before he went on his second assignment. So Saturday he left for Jakarta, and he's there. And when he first got out of school, he actually lived in our house so that we could help him offset the cost. And I was talking to this 27-year-old young man who, since he was a teenager, wanted to be a public servant. And when I talked about why he wanted to serve and why he wanted to be in the Foreign Service, he started breaking down economics and how the different layers interplayed and interacted in Asia. And while he was in Jakarta now, he talked about how important relationships were with Japan and China. And ultimately, he wanted to be in Vietnam. And I'm sitting here as an older person, like, I wanted to get in the government to get a 15, maybe an SES. And here's this young kid talking at such a phenomenal level. But then as we talked some more, he talked about the data, and the data said at the 5 to 6 year point, that's when a lot of turnover happened and people left the Foreign Service, much more so people of color. So using that data, he talked about how while being in Jakarta and excited to be in Asia, he'd never been there. He doesn't know anybody. We started talking about things that focus on his well-being, also some of his resilience. And he also talked about the culture there, how it's very localized. And if you don't go with the flow, and sometimes in some embassies, if you don't maintain the status quo at that local level, you're really subject to retribution, retaliation. So we started focusing on resilience. And then lastly, the ability to clearly define success and provide clarity. And that got to the topics that we picked today. So I reached out to this all-star team of people to talk about these topics as they relate to the future of work. First and foremost, I have Jason Larson, who this week or last week was named one of the top 10 employee engagement people by PeopleHum. He's also a top 101 employee engagement leader by Inspiring Workplaces. He's a keynote speaker. He's an author. I've known him for a few years, and he just understands engagement, performance, and work experience at a practical level that, truth be told, you don't really see from consultants. He has 2 books. One's called Unlocking High Performance. The second one's called Social Gravity, Harnessing the Natural Laws of Relationships. I also have Dr. Rhonda Jones, who is a civil servant. She's also CEO and managing member of Human Capital Focus Group. Nice experience, strategic HR, which as you focus on the future of work needs to lay it out. She's also an adjunct professor at Georgetown and Johns Hopkins. And hey, we need to get her at American. I mean, if she's going to be in the neighborhood, she should be on our block. And Rhonda's going to talk about data and analytics. I forgot to say, Jason's going to talk about well-being and performance. We also have Mike Anderson. And first and foremost, we're going to say Mike Anderson is a retired Marine Corps veteran. So we always honor our service members. Mike is the founder of Anderson Global Talent. I've actually worked with this guy, and from a HR standpoint, he has the ability to see around corners and pay attention to detail, which is very rare in his work career. He's been both a CHRO and in the private sector, and in the public sector, he's also been a chief human capital officer. Last but not least but not last, we have the soon-to-be Dr. Alade Sarmiento, who is also a proud Key graduate. She is the Director for Resources and National Security Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. Working on her doctorate, she thinks Rhonda and I have sympathy for her because she's up till 3 or 4 in the morning, and actually we don't. And I am Dr. Russell Robinson. I'm a civil servant. I've got an LLC. I'm a researcher. I do a few things, but I'm a grandfather, and my grandkids drive me crazy, and that's the most important role. So with that, we're going to talk about the format real quick. What we are doing is each person will kind of have a mini presentation, go about 15 minutes with some Q&A attached. So as they speak, please populate your questions in the chat box, and then we'll do some Q&A on the back end at 15 minutes. We'll pass it off, and then at the end, we'll do some open Q&A. So with that, everybody sit back because we've got this group where you're going to learn some stuff. So when I'm not speaking, I'm going to be taking notes because these guys are fantastic. So first up, and I kind of feel like Steve Harvey, are you ready for your next comedian? Actually, first off, we are going to start with Dr. Rhonda Jones.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rudd. So as you said, 2020 was a crazy year, a year of disruption, anxiety, upheaval, grieving socially, politically, also in terms of health and the labor market. It was also an opportunity for learning and growth, both at an individual level and on an organizational level. So in my opinion, what organizations learned, especially federal agencies, is that we should have been doing a better job at all the things now highlighted in future of work articles. Issues like connection, maintaining it, remote work, employee voice, wellness, and burnout. We should have been making strides in those areas all along. To me, COVID and all the other factors from 2020 just brought those topics quickly to the forefront. So what I would like to highlight today is the need for us, organizational leaders, to make sure that we're still using data analytics, both quantitative and qualitative, to inform our human capital decisions. With so many future of work concepts flying around, everywhere you turn, someone is talking about it. I mean, look at us, right? We're here today talking about it. So there's the tendency to get caught up and just try implementing anything and everything and just seeing what sticks. That's definitely, though, not what we should be doing. That type of unstructured approach would just leave our staff more anxious and more confused. So leaders must have a clear, well thought out path forward. In addition, we have to make sure we are focusing on how our actions might impact positively or negatively our many diverse employee groups. And I'm not just referring to our traditional groupings such as race, ethnicity, gender. I'm also referring to individuals with differing abilities, employees in various stages of their career, various stages of the employee life cycle, as well as how to help employees bring their whole selves, their authentic selves into the workplace. So how do we do this within a data analytics framework? Of course, I have some suggestions, right? So in my view, there are several steps to human capital analytics. I'm not going to go through all of them today, but I want to highlight a few. I want to highlight formulating your question, gathering data, analyzing it, interpreting the findings, and making a decision and implementing that decision, and how we can do that and while incorporating diverse viewpoints. So if we start with formulating the question, right, that's the first step of data analytics, especially human capital analytics. Our question is tied to the business need. So what is it we're trying to make better? What problem are we trying to solve? Those, and we should ask ourselves, will those questions, the questions we're going to be answering, help us plan for multiple and emerging visions of the future? Also, do our questions mirror our organizational values? So as an example, we might want to know how to better engage employees in the workplace. As we know, many of us go from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting during our workday. But before we go off to try something new, we need to decide, are we trying to engage everyone? Are we trying to focus on employees who have never teleworked before? Are there certain employee groups who have shown low employee engagement in the past, right? Why is this work necessary? Who does the work benefit? And for federal agencies, I would add, we would want to know, how does better engaging our workforce benefit the community at large? Because federal employees, we're there to serve the public. There's another side to asking those questions, though, and that is, who can the process or questioning harm and why? Is there some organizational history we should be aware of? We have to be informed leaders before we undertake data analytics. We have to clearly decide who gets to frame the problem or determine what questions we ask. This can help us identify stakeholders, create a framework to interweave diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the data lifecycle. So I have an example. An organization I work with recently switched the app they use for video conferencing to save money now that all their employees pretty much are working remotely. So they put together a self-selected team to investigate new apps, and they selected one. The company was all excited. This was a way to offer telework to everyone while keeping the cost down. Well, it wasn't until the new app was installed and employees were using it that the organization found out that this new app had limited capability for employees with visual challenges. Obviously, they should have known this before switching to the new platform, right? But they did not include diverse perspectives on the procurement team. In this day and age, with everything going on in the world and diversity, equity, and inclusion at the forefront of public policy, we can't afford not to incorporate that into human capital analytics. We talk about gathering data, and here I want to consider both quantitative and qualitative data. One of the things that 2020 taught us is that we have to consider the whole person. When data are integrated across multiple sources, we get a more holistic view of the experiences of and outcomes for employees. So we should ask ourselves, do we have people trained in survey methods or qualitative research? People who not only know the techniques, but know how to make sure questions are phrased in a way that is sensitive to diverse employee groups and populations. Questions that can compassionately tease out the information we're trying to obtain. The other thing, and I think this is important, is, are we considering intersectionality in our research? You've probably heard the term. Intersectionality refers to the kind of interwoven, interconnected identities of an individual, including race, gender identity, nationality, sexual orientation, and disability. So collecting demographic data to better understand potential negative impact based on intersectionality, in my opinion, can be an important step toward equity. I was recently reading an article by the American Public Health Association about the problem with using the term women and minorities. All right, we've heard that term before. People say research was done looking at how women and minorities feel about XYZ. According to the article, and I agree with it, there's a problem with that term, women and minorities, because the statement implies there's mutual exclusivity of these populations. Missing from that is the understanding that these two categories could intersect, as they do in the lives of many racial and ethnic minority women. So then you have another issue with that term, and that is the term minority has many definitions. We usually think of it in terms of race or ethnicity, but it can also refer to sexual orientation and identification, or individuals with differing physical and mental abilities. So if we think about it, the term minority in conjunction with women, it can obscure the existence of multiple intersecting categories. So what other terms do we use in the workplace that obscure employees' intersectionality? Other terms that do not indicate their whole selves? And what impact does that have in the workplace? So I feel we need to consider that in human capital analytics, since much of the future of work research we're reading now references the importance of the employee experience. In order to improve it, we have to understand that it's just as diverse as our employees are. So now if we talk about another aspect of data analytics, there's performing the analytics. The questions we need to ask ourselves is, do we have trained staff who know what statistical tests to perform and or how to code the qualitative data? Uh, as we know, Russ, organizing qualitative data into themes requires someone to determine those themes, those categories. And we have to ask ourselves who or what is the frame of reference or the template for doing so? And how does that person's worldview play into the coding or themes for the data? And then, are we checking the data we've gathered to ensure we've correctly captured what our employees are saying, not what we think they're saying? There's also the consideration of using AI and algorithms in data analytics. Yes, everybody's doing it, including the federal government, but how do we ensure there's equity in the algorithms and statistical tools? We could have an entire session on that, right? So I just want to touch on a few things. So when it comes to AI and any automation of data analytics, we have to involve diverse stakeholders, including specific employee groups, possibly unions, maybe even community advisory boards. We have to involve them early on in the conversations about the purpose of an algorithm prior to development and implementation. We also need to do impact assessments that involve thoroughly thinking through the potential intended and unintended consequences and have what's called human-led algorithms. So that's where a human can go in and override an algorithm at any point in the process. And to me, that's especially important if we notice any adverse impacts. Of course, we have to interpret the findings. Who's responsible for that? Is there more than one explanation? And do these explanations vary from demographic group to, one demographic group to another? How do members of those demographic groups interpret the results? And lastly, I want to talk about making a decision and implementing the decision. Here, I can't stress enough, we cannot be afraid of the data, of the results. We have to own them. We can't disregard employees' voices, regardless of what they tell us. I was working with a company once who had just conducted a series of focus groups to figure out the reason why employees didn't trust their leadership team. The results indicated a clear theme across all the focus groups. Management often harassed employees and created a hostile work environment. Well, senior leaders didn't like the findings, right? So they disregarded them, saying focus groups are just a waste of time. All you get are groups of employees who want to cry and complain. So they did nothing with the results. They didn't take any action to rectify things. Sure enough, about a year later, I was called back to the same organization because they heard the same comments during a survey they conducted. They failed to listen to their employees the first time, even though the employee voice was clear. So that brings me back to my opening comments. With so many future of work concepts flying around, there's a tendency to just, implement anything and everything, right? As I mentioned before, that's not the right way. Leaders must have a clear and well-informed path forward, and we need to, that path has to consider the voices from all of our diverse employees. And so in ending, I'll say, data analytics isn't the most exciting topic, but we're here having this conversation about the future work, lessons learned from 2020, and we all know the workplace is not standing still. It's changing rapidly, dynamically, and we have a chance to shape the workplace, to create something more just, something more equitable, something more inclusive. And it's my view that we need to do that in an informed way with data.
Okay, Rhonda, thanks for that. So the first question I would have is, as the federal government starts to utilize data analytics, AI, robotics more, what would be the first steps if you find yourself as a leader or those within your span of control, your direct reports, do not have that type of analytical skill set?
That's okay. Admit it, hire great people. Remember, as leaders, we're only as good as our team, right? So the key is finding people who do have that skill set, do have that understanding, and understand how diversity, equity, and inclusion fits into data analytics. So you don't have to know it all. You could have good people. The other thing, though, is as leaders, we should never stop learning. And there are plenty of quick courses you can take. You don't have to spend a lot of money to get up to speed. So it sounds like I'm saying two different things, but yeah, you need to have good people. You don't have to do it all yourself, but you shouldn't stop learning. And if this is a new arena for you, well, guess what? Take the time to learn something about it.
Mike, Jason, Alade, either of you have any thoughts you want to chime in on this? Don't forget to unmute yourself. Going once, going twice. Lamont, do we have any questions out there for this one?
I don't believe so. However, if you still have any questions for Dr. Rhonda, please be sure to put it in the chat and we'll read them out near the end as well.
Cool. Well, I actually, we have a question from any suggestions on quick courses for analytics.
So I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head, but Coursera.org. It's COURSERA.org. They're one of the open platforms for courses. I've taken a few there. They have courses from universities around the world, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, I mean, pretty much you name it. And you can go in, you can actually get a certificate or degree. You can audit a course for free. And I've actually gone in, I had the crazy notion that I would learn Python for some crazy reason, right, for data analytics, and went on and took a course there. So I would start there. You can go in and search for classes for free. That would be a great place to start.
One more quick one, Rhonda. How can you ensure that you have diverse participation?
So one of the things I think is really important is that you have a champion at the leadership team, the highest ranks, indicating that this is important for the organization. Of course, you don't want to force people to participate and have their feedback, but it's so important to have a champion at the top. The other thing I would say is you have to have multiple ways for people to give feedback. Not everybody is going to do a survey. Not everybody is going to participate in a focus group. And so you have to have multiple avenues for people to give their perspective to whatever effort you're about to put forward.
Cool. Thanks, Rhonda. So with that, we're going to move to our next mini session, which will be talking about well-being and performance with Jason Lauritsen.
Thanks, Dr. Russ, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I come here, I think, filled with some optimism about the future of work. I kind of will build on what Dr. Rhonda said about, I think our call is to create, to manifest the future of work. A lot of times the future of work is talked about as if it's written already, as it's already happened. We're just trying to figure out what's coming. We get to create it. And the last year has really accelerated things. I think the way that I view it, because it seems in the conversations I've had as people observe their organizations, is what happened is I hear one of two things. Either the scales fell off of our eyes and we can actually see things we couldn't see before because we were forced to, or a mirror was held up and we suddenly had to sort of get real about what was there in front of us. And so the analytics is a great place to start. I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly about one of the things that I think we see that's been reflected, that the scales are out of the way. And that is that, the last year, one of the silver linings we've gotten from the last year, despite its sort of really high cost, is that our managers and leaders finally, perhaps for the first time, felt and saw the power and impact of well-being on performance, on work performance. It was there. You couldn't avoid it. They felt it. They saw it in their people. And I think, this is our opportunity. The thing about well-being is that it's always been there, right? Yeah, we had it stashed away in the corner. We would talk about it once in a while. We had these cute programs we would do once in a while, but it's always been there. And we all know it's been there. We've lived through it. I mean, I think about my own experience. I've not been great and consistent about caring for my well-being over the years. I go through fits and starts. But I think about moments in my own career, like, I participated in a starter marriage. It takes me usually a couple of times to get things right. So my first one didn't go very well. And I remember when my marriage was falling apart, I thought my wife was cheating on me. I mean, I was a hot mess, and there was no way when that was coming apart that I could show up to work and do good work. My brain was scattered. I was emotionally a wreck. Like I had nothing to give. So I took some time off actually, because I knew that I couldn't work. Or, I was a work hard, play hard guy early in my career. I took it very seriously. And so there's a lot of days I rolled into work as a sales guy hungover. And I can tell you, we've all, for those of us who've been through that, you don't do your best work when you're hungover. Your brain is at half capacity. That doesn't make for working up to your potential. We've all been sick. I just talked to somebody this week that talked about how she was so excited because she just finally found a drug to cure, or at least help her not have 9 to 12 migraines a week. Like, imagine what that was doing to her work performance, or worrying about how you're going to pay for your rent or feed your family, or caregiving for a parent. I mean, the point of all of this is that when our well-being is diminished, when we are unwell, when one of our core human needs is not met, whether that's, safety or connection or meaning or any of the other list of needs aren't met, or there's some big obstacles in our way, we cannot perform at our best. That is a reality. And we saw that clearly this year. We've all been through it. We know it. Our leaders know it. Our managers know it. But now it's like sitting in front of us, staring at us. And I think that's why I'm bullish that I think the future of work is well-being, right? It's been there in the background for a while. Well-being, the way I like to talk about well-being is that well-being is a performance capacity issue. So if you think about this, when I think about, the inconvenient truth of the work of well-being is, though, it's very awkward for us because so much of what gets in the way of our well-being doesn't happen neatly within work hours. It doesn't happen neatly within the confines of work. What we think about it, it's stuff that happens in our relationships at home, or it's stuff that happens in our bank accounts that we can't even talk. We're not even comfortable talking to the people we live with about. It happens in lots of different places. And yet it shows up and impacts us at work. If I show up to, in the morning, I roll out to log into work and I've got all the stuff going on. My marriage is falling apart. I'm physically not feeling well because I'm self-medicating with Busch Lights to try to forget about all the other stuff. And, when I show up, I might only have 25% of my potential to even offer. You can have the greatest, most perfect engagement and performance program in place in your organization, and you're trying to optimize 25% of my potential. That is what we have in front of us, and it's time we finally solve this. And this is the opportunity we have in front of us. And so I thought about this today, like say, okay, so what do we do? I'm going to come and talk about this. What do we do about it? And there's so many things. We just talked about it. There's measurement and there's all sorts of things that we could do, but I'm going to give you one thing today. Maybe it's two. I don't know. We'll see. You can decide if it's one or two. But I think the killer app for well-being going forward, especially with managers and leaders, is that we have to start teaching compassion. And I can almost guarantee you don't have that in your management training program right now. Compassion isn't even a word that was really on my radar until recently, because I was searching for what is it. And here's the thing about compassion. What I've learned about compassion is compassion shows up in a lot of different places, psychology, Buddhism, a lot of different places. But compassion, the best sample or the best example or definition I've seen breaking it down in psychology says compassion has 4 elements. There's 4 things that to demonstrate compassion we have to do as human beings. The first is, and first let me ground that compassion is about recognizing and taking action on suffering or struggle in other people. And so the 4 things are: I have to notice or recognize that you're suffering, that you are in pain, that you're struggling, or whatever it is. I have to notice. I have to then be emotionally moved by it. It has to affect me. Then I have to have an intention or a desire for you to be out of that pain, out of that struggle or suffer. And then this is where the magic of compassion comes in. I have to then move to action. I have to do something about it. And so when I think about that, like, what more do we want from our managers going forward? I mean, one of the realities that's been laid bare over the last year when we've sent people home to work is managers realized, I think a lot of managers and supervisors have had to come to grips with the fact that 80% of the stuff they were doing on a day-to-day basis that they thought was management and was helping people perform better, when they were in person, this sort of make work management doesn't actually do anything. People were just fine when you weren't there to keep an eye on them. And so what do we really need to be focused on? We need to be focused on their well-being. If we can get more of their potential, they know what to do with potential if we just get out of their way. And so compassion, I think, is the killer app, and we need to research and study that and start bringing that in. And so here's the other thing, big caveat. Even if we teach compassion, I think one of the bigger things we have to do that you can start doing right now, tomorrow, is you have to give your people permission to care. One of the things the biggest injustices that HR has done to the world is we have scared the bejesus out of managers. They're so afraid of getting in trouble, getting sued, that they won't even have the conversations that matter. They're terrified. And so we have to give them permission to care, give them permission to be human, teach them how to be compassionate, teach them how to help till it hurts. And I really think that's our killer app going forward. And so Russ, the question I'm sure that it'll get asked is like, okay, so what does that look like? What's the tool? And so the last thing I'll give you is, I think this is why there's been so much talk about check-ins, right? Managers got to be checking in. And when you're checking in on the human being. You're not checking in on performance. You're not checking on how you coming on that project. You're checking in on the human being. How are you? What can I help with? What do you need? That's where compassion starts. And then you got to help till it hurts, right? That's really the follow-up. So that's my evangelizing on well-being for today, Dr. Russ.
All right. So the first question, can you provide advice on how to feel a sense of well-being in the work environment led by a person who works before 8 a.m., keeps tasking the staff well into the evening, 11 p.m. or later, and sometimes sends emails at 3 a.m. and sets due dates for the weekend? This is happening in my office, which is led by a political appointee.
That's probably a bigger question than I can probably tackle immediately. But I would say that I think one of the things that I have found and that I often counsel around when you have managers like that is, I think the first question you have to answer is, you have to get really clear on how much of yourself you're willing to give. Number one, you have to be clear on what it is you're offering. What are you willing to give? The other thing is, then you have to start from that. You start building some of your own boundaries. And there's some sacrifices and some trade-offs that you make. But I have found that bosses like this are really hungry for control. They're really hungry to get in your business. And if you keep feeding them every time they show up for a snack, they just keep coming back and wanting more. And so you start putting in tiny boundaries along the way. I stop responding to the emails at 3 a.m. in the morning. Eventually, they realize there's no point sending at 3 a.m. Or they know that when they send a 3 a.m. Email, you'll respond at 7 or 8. So I fundamentally believe that people teach us the way we treat them to. And I know that's an oversimplification, but just think about where you can start taking back little bits of control over time. Set your boundaries and just keep moving them a little at a time. And I think you'll be surprised by what you can do.
Second question, is compassion really teachable?
It sure is. It absolutely is. But it's not something that, it has to be done with intention. In fact, there's a fair amount of research that suggests that, like, we start out, like, there's demonstrable measures of compassion in humans as children, like early, before we can even cognate, like that, when we see an animal in distress, we will just children just will want to help. So we have sort of a natural compassion instinct. So I think it's not so much about teaching it as much as it is reconnecting to that instinct and giving people the tools for how to do it. And honestly, like I said, giving them permission to be compassionate, because I think we've largely sort of squeezed this and beaten this out of our managers and supervisors over the years.
And Jason, our friend Dr. Brad Shuck out of the University of Louisville has done some research that really focuses on, he did work with the city of Louisville, and they found that the number one driver of engagement for those employees surveyed was compassion. And I think that was highlighted in last year's World Economic Forum conference. Next question. I'm involved in a mental health business resource group at my company. I'd love to hear your thoughts on initiatives that you're seeing that are successful in the workplace to promote mental health awareness.
Wow. So the biggest, well, I mean, I have been on a journey to study those that are much better experts than I on this. But what I've been hearing is a lot of the work has been, the work starts with destigmatization of the language. It starts with teaching managers, I think equipping managers. What I found is two sides. One is destigmatizing the language generally. So that's getting messages out. It's just constantly bringing forward messages to make it so that people understand what language to use, how to talk in a way that doesn't create the stigma or doesn't cause people to reel back from it or not want to talk about it. But the other thing is equipping managers with some basics at a very basic level, so they're not terrified of someone having a mental health, equipping them how to recognize when they see warning signs, and then how to engage that employee or what to do if they do recognize it. Just some simple things, because it's a very daunting thing for managers if they're not equipped or they don't feel comfortable. So those are things that I've heard and seen have some real impact. And they can be pretty simple, but you just got to get some good expert advice in their hands so they know what to do.
Okay. I think we're going to, I got a question, but I'm going to save it for the open Q&A so we can be respectful of time. So now we're going to hear from Alade Sarmiento, and she's going to talk about clarity and communication.
Thank you, Dr. Russ, and thank you for the invitation to be here. As a former Key alum, it's always my privilege to participate in anything related to the program. So leading with clarity in a time of crisis. John Maxwell defines crisis as an intense time of difficulty requiring a decision that will be a turning point. And in a time of crisis is very difficult. As Dr. Jones said, a year ago, or actually 13 months ago, we faced something that we have never faced in our entire life. And it really brought back one of my favorite books, which is Deep Change by Robert E. Quinn. And he has a powerful quote that he says, "Walking naked in the land of uncertainty," which I fully embraced as my mantra in 2020. And this quote doesn't refer to that ongoing nightmare before you're going to make a speech that you don't have any clothes on. This quote refers to deep change, and deep change refers to getting rid of what you know and just walking into the land of uncertainty. And as leaders, most of us have built our identity around our knowledge and our competence and employing certain techniques and abilities. For me, as someone who sits in an HR office, I use, my knowledge of policy and procedures and guidance, to provide direction to managers and to employees. And during this time, it's something that I truly have not been able to do because of this unknown situation. And the last time I felt this level of uncertainty was during 9/11. And during 9/11, it was very unique. It was my second day as a supervisor, and I was supervising about 20 employees. I was a GS 11, had taken a lateral to be a supervisor. And, I get to the office, of course, and this is in Denver, Colorado. My boss says, I need to see you in my office. We need to dismiss our employees. Kind of just, brief me quickly what was going on, even though I had seen pieces of the news before I had left my home. At that time, the building that we were in that housed government employees. We were in a huge compound, and it was kind of in the middle of nowhere, so our building really stuck out. And so we dismissed, our staff, and it hit me that I was now a leader or managing, because I couldn't go home. I had to be on conference calls. I had to get information on a COOP plan, which I was a what? I haven't heard about a COOP plan. Get them familiar with employee contact lists and other planning contingencies. And I was completely walking in the land of uncertainty. And, it was my second day on the job. So fast forward 19 years later, this pandemic hits. And it's not really your regular work problem that you can just, gather information, come up with a solution, you implement, and then you pivot if it's not working. This has been so much more complex. This virus has created great uncertainty. Our stress levels and anxiety have been high. And really, truly, our employees have looked to us to provide answers that we really don't have. The last severe pandemic was the Spanish influenza of 1918, and there wasn't any policy or guidance that we could follow. So, the guidance that we did have, we had to proceed cautiously. And, my response during this time was, I'm committed to providing you timely and accurate information as soon as it becomes available. And so as leaders, our shift really, our concerns shifted for the safety of our employees. We did start looking at, how are they? How are their families? We were challenged to do things differently in a very short time span. The concept of maximum telework for many of us was new. I mean, for me, we had just slowly let our employees do one day. I think it was my second telework day last year when this happened. There was, in the federal workforce, there was only 22% of federal employees teleworking, a little more than a year ago. So I did have to focus my results, shift my focus from results, and really focus on the work that my staff was being completed. And I appreciate what Jason said. You really do have to shift in this time because your employees are dealing with schooling, childcare, elder care, illness, and perhaps even loss. We've had a lot of loss. And so as we look forward, we really have to shift our focus. And right now, there are three things that employees want from us. They want to know, where are we headed? How are we going to get there? And how is the leader going to get us and keep us there safely? So the first one, right now, where are we headed? It's a perfect time for us to stop and assess what has worked during this time and what hasn't. I surveyed a couple employees, and they basically said, here are the things that from our perspective have worked. Proof of concept that telework works. Employees have proven that they are flexible to provide and adapt to immediate change. Employees have proven to us that they are resilient when faced with adversity. Less meetings have made employees more productive. Employees have truly found the meaning of work-life balance because now they shut down their computers and they can just go out of their office, whatever their work place is, and enjoy their family. And they have realized that family matters more than they've ever realized. And the last one is self-care has positive outcomes on employee health and well-being. So the task before us of where we're headed is not easy because we have to consider multiple layers. Leaders need to assess the following. If you're in a public-facing organization, how do you return a limited number of employees to the office safely? And if you're not in a face-to-face environment, is there a need to return to the office? Or how often do you need your employees in the office? The second thing that employees want to know is, how do we get there? And it's been said already, we need to be intentional and strategic because what we implement now may have a lasting effect. Just think of all the changes that are still in place because of the safety measures put in after 9/11. And we will get there with the help of our employees. We really, really need to hear their voices, and we need to acknowledge the value and information that they're giving us. We need to engage them in the conversation. And then the third is, how is a leader going to keep us there, get us there and keep us safe? And there's a lot of anxiety. CNN reported that 55% of Americans fear returning back to the office, and they also fear the pre-pandemic life. So how do we get them safely? If you need to bring employees back into the office, you need to let them know why you're bringing them into the office and what you are doing in order to provide them a safe environment. And one thing that is very crucial at this time is communication. You need to communicate at all levels in order to lead with clarity. You need to make use of email. You need to make use of internal websites, conference calls, and video calls. I'll share one final thing that talks to communicating at all levels. And the previous organization I worked for, we used to have an anti-fraud campaign, Think Twice First. And it covered anything that could result in fraud within the organization. It covered that, whether it was travel cards, time and attendance, not locking your workstation, loss of PII. So the initiative, every month you would get a topic, and it was an email first to the managers that provided the topic, talking points, FAQs, and a poster, followed by an email to employees. Then the managers, with their talking points, they had to talk about the topic at the next staff meeting, and they had to certify that they talked to the staff. And there was also a website banner that had been created, and this actually created a consistent message that was given 4 different types of way. And right now, that's what we need to do. We need to communicate what we know, what we have, in a clear and concise manner. So it's, clarity in crisis can definitely be achieved.
All right, Alade. So I want to go back to your job on 9/11 when it was your second day there, and you're still wondering what's going on. There's fear, anxiety, complexity, and you're leading people. How do you provide clarity when sometimes the answer is unknown or information changes?
It's difficult, but what I had to do was communicate what was going on, communicate clearly, let them know the expectations. The next day, there were so many things put in place for the safety of employees that included getting into the compound, and you had dogs that were checking the cars, as well as security with one of those mirrors that just went around it. You had to open your trunk. So as a leader, it was, here's what to expect tomorrow. And honestly, a few days later, we had a bomb threat where we had to literally evacuate. And it was, multiple buses and just ushering people into buses, keeping track of people, communicating. And And this is, 19 years ago. So this is before cell phones. So you can imagine just another layer of complexity.
Let me ask you, based on the pandemic and 9/11, is there one recurring lesson learned that you did different for the pandemic that you didn't do for 9/11?
I have to use a word that Jason used, compassionate, because I've always been in organizations that have been very stringent, very keeping track of time in that you log in, how much time is your light green on Skype, how many hours are you putting in? And I really had to shift my focus from that to results. Is the work getting done? With my employees going through all this turmoil, is the work, being completed? Being flexible regarding work hours. I've got employees who start working as early as 5 o'clock in the morning just to accommodate their schedule with children. We've had to really, focus from being a micromanager to being just, is the work getting done? So that has definitely been a hard challenge for me, because I was used to looking at, I need them to be, accountable for 8 hours. They're doing the job in spite of everything else that's going on.
Thank you. Thank you, Alade. So for our last presentation for open Q&A, we're going to go to Mike Anderson, and he will talk about organizational resilience.
Thank you, Dr. Russ, and thank you, fellow panelists. It's an honor to be here. Thanks to American University as well. 3 years ago, I attended the Key Leadership Program, and many of the things I will talk about today around resilience are very ably taught in that program. One of the reasons that we're here today, not just on this call, but more generally, the fact that we're alive, is because we have shown ourselves to be resilient. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a test of our resilience. The question before us today is, how do we prepare for a future of work where the major challenges of our time are likely to continue, and in fact, new ones are to be added, which will magnify our stress levels, even to traumatic levels. While there are no guarantees in life, there are some things we can do to improve the odds of surviving and moving forward to achieve our goals and objectives. The approach I will discuss today is one that should be practiced daily to overcome adversity that we face in our lives. It is through this everyday practice of resilience that we build skills to improve our chances of not only surviving traumatic events, but succeeding and even thriving, helping others and ourselves to live a good life. To dive a bit deeper into this topic, I want to focus on 3 questions. The first one is, what is resilience? The second, why is it important? And third, how do we build next level resilience? Let me read, for the question of what is resilience, let me read a few definitions about resilience. The Oxford Dictionary says that it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Another expert says that it's being capable of functioning with a sense of purpose, meaning, and forward momentum in the face of trauma. Our Department of Homeland Security defines it as the ability to adapt to changing conditions and to withstand and rapidly recover from disruptions due to emergencies. The federal government's continuity of operation, or COOP, it's an initiative to ensure federal departments and agencies are able to continue to perform the essential functions of their mission under a broad range of circumstances. Recovery and continuity in the face of massive disruption is a common theme in all of these definitions, to take a punch and to bounce back and continue to do the mission. Why is resilience important? Let me tell you a story to illustrate the answer. In his prime, heavyweight champion Mike Tyson was asked by a reporter if he was concerned about the fight plan of an opponent in an upcoming match. You may remember his answer. It was classic and for the ages. He said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So for us, resilience is important because sometimes life challenges like COVID-19 is going to punch us in the mouth. And when we get punched in the mouth, we want our muscle memory to immediately kick in. And muscle memory is best cultivated in part by how we live, work, and play. Our baseline resilience goal is to survive the trauma and to be able to take the punch and operate at a basic reduced level. But we want to do more than survive. We want to bounce back and go on to achieve our goals. Even further, we want to thrive and help others to achieve their goals as well. We know that life doesn't stand still. Indeed, the challenges of life are growing at a faster pace and with increasing complexity and interconnectivity. Therefore, our approach to building next level resilience must be one that we continually practice. How exactly do we do that, you might ask? You did ask that question, right? Very good. Well, I'm here to answer that question for you, at least offer a perspective. So how do we build resilience at the next level? As I said earlier, where we can, it's very important that we make resilience a part of who we are, what we do, and how and why we do it, versus creating yet another silo to manage. There are three things we can do to help create next level resilience. First, know ourselves better. Second, improve our know-how. And third, to simply know more about 1 and 2. Let's take know ourselves better. We must continue to work on our self-awareness, and as Dr. Jones said, our whole person development, focusing particularly on finding meaning and purpose in life. Psychologists and other experts who study people who survive traumatic experiences report that the people who discover meaning and purpose in life have much higher levels of resilience than those who do not. Looking at resilience from a different perspective, that of employee engagement, the research shows that employees who find meaning and purpose in their work actually perform better on the job. Their productivity rates are much higher. Purpose undergirds everything in our lives. It serves as our North Star. It's our foundation. It helps us to keep our head in the game and to avoid costly distractions. It's our gift, our contribution that we make to make the world a better place. It is the most important foundation in our life. It supports and sustains us. It's there when other tectonic plates are shifting. Let's talk about know-how, the second thing that we can do to build resilience. Our job is where purpose becomes more focused. It's what we call mission. So it's where purpose now funnels down into mission, and that's our job. It's where parameters are put in place to solve a particular problem in a particular area. This is a space that many of us are familiar with, that we're comfortable in this space. Through our job, we can influence outcomes and our surroundings. Our first job is to make sure that we're in the right job. Job fit matters a lot. To that end, we have position descriptions with essential functions and primary duties. We also have performance plans with key priorities, milestones, and standards of performance. And we're all familiar with that annual ritual of performance appraisals, where we demonstrate our mastery of our craft and where we make an impact on the stated goals and objectives. One of the things we can do to improve our know-how is to view our job appropriately as part of a larger system and to seek to improve our understanding of that system as well as systems in general to become more system savvy, gaining a better understanding of interconnectivity and component dependencies. We must strive to know how critical systems that we're involved with work and perform. There are systems, these are systems that we depend on, and in some cases, they depend on us. We can better understand and leverage these systems by examining the diversity of outputs and collecting quality data. Again, something Dr. Jones spoke on, real-time data about the operation and performance. The last area is know more, and that's know more about self-awareness and know more about our job. We can bring more intelligence to the fight by using more of our brain power to increase our range of tools and options that help us to adapt. Adopting the view that both positive and negative experiences will lead to learning and growth. Know more involves a constant adjustment to new information and knowledge, continuous learning from current and past results, and applying the knowledge to adjust our plan to the new contexts and circumstances in order to overcome adversity and to consistently get better. How much of our intelligence do we actually use? It's been said that we use only 10%. It's not really clear what the answer is, what the percentage is. But what is clear is that we undervalue certain sources of human intelligence. In fact, our educational system and our own personal learning preferences favor intellect and analytical skills above other sources of intelligence. For example, the intelligence of creativity. It's regrettable, yet commonly believed, that creativity is the purview of a precious few instead of being found of a widespread talent that's abundantly present in all human beings. Albert Einstein spoke powerfully about the importance of imagination. Emotional intelligence, up until a few years ago, was pretty much ignored in personal and professional development. When we fail to invest in all the sources of our intelligence, we show up with less than a full team. Imagine that you're invited to play against NBA All-Stars. That kind of happens in everyday life when we show up to face the challenges and the adversity that we're all constantly up against. The fact is, we show up with less than a full team. We may have a Michael Jordan in our intellectual and analytical skills. We may even have a Russell Westbrook as well when it comes to emotional intelligence. But it tapers off after that. And so the fact is that we are an abundance of human intelligence, diverse in our intelligence set, and we underutilize it. Halliday spoke about 9/11. Let's take that as an example. 2 years after the event, the 9/11 Commission concluded that the attacks were actually preventable. And the fact that they were not was due to a failure of imagination, their word. Meaning that the evidence was available, but responsible officials failed to connect the dots and to imagine what was being planned. For example, in the years leading up to 9/11, terrorists in a couple of international attacks intentionally crashed commercial flights. Meanwhile, in the United States, there was an increased number of foreign nationals taking flight training, but showing little interest in how to land a plane safely. You get the point. In conclusion, there are a variety of things we can begin doing on a daily basis to develop and tap into a broad array of our human intelligence. And by practicing these things every day, we move closer to reaching our true potential and improving our odds of doing well in and after traumatic situations.
Hey, Mike, I got a question. So let's try to take this and make it all practical. So let's say you're building this resilient organization, but weaving in what Jason said, weaving in what Alade said, you're noticing that one of your leaders is not being resilient, either through some form of well-being challenge, and they're not communicating clearly. So how do you work with someone who's struggling to show resilience during a crisis?
During a crisis is a bit more challenging. I think it's that compassion thing, as Jason said. You have to model that, and you have to model that in the most inconvenient times. And when someone is falling short, the instinct is in our competitive and especially in a crisis where when the pressure's on and what comes out of the toothpaste tube is actually, sometimes some mixed stuff. And so modeling the kind of behavior that you want this manager to demonstrate, that's exactly what you got to show to that manager. And also hooking that manager up with others, peers, that can steer that manager in the right direction. So during a crisis, it's tough. You're moving fast, but that would be a quick answer of how we might do that.
All right. So we're gonna go to open Q&A. So everybody, please feel free to populate questions into Dr. Rhonda, Jason, Alade, Mike, or even myself. And there's a question that I want to follow up on from Jason's session. You talk about the need for compassion magnificently. In my experience, a lot of leaders just don't care sometimes. So what are some of the practices you would recommend when employees or leaders are encountering a barrier to people caring about compassion?
Sure. I think the answer probably was, I think Dr. Rhonda probably started us there. Like, what at least the tools that I have found to be effective in my career, whether it was when I was in HR as an HR leader or as I advise people, is you have to find a way. You have to find a way to humanize the employee experience to that leader. So the leader that doesn't care, there's two things. There's the, sometimes they don't care because they don't know, right? So they're in like the client that was described, that's like, well, that can't be right. You know, we throw out like, that can't be right, that our man, we wouldn't allow managers to bully people. And then it keeps coming up. And so it's like, finally that data makes them come face to face with the reality of the experience. So I think that's one. The other, and I think this is the part that is more interesting, or you know, there's that step, which sometimes that wakes them up. They're like, oh, well, I didn't realize we were having this impact, and they wake up and they start to take steps towards change. The other side of it is finding out, you know, I sort of developed my HR superpowers, I think, when I gave up on needing leaders to do the right thing for the right reason. And so when I like, okay, they're not going to care. They don't care about people. Fine. Okay, I'm not going to win that. They're just like that. They don't have the black soul, whatever. What do they care about? And then how can I make this look like that thing? So if I care about losing people and having to replace them, then that's it. Or if I care about productivity and performance, then that's the thing. I'm going to take what I need them to do and make it look like the thing that they care about. That's usually when they'll activate. And they may not activate exactly the way I want them to, but we're talking progress, not perfection here. So let's move them forward. So that would be the two things I would think about.
I think that's perfect. Jason made a great point. I was actually thinking two things. One, we should be hiring the right leaders. That's the probably most important thing we can do. But you're right. There are some folks who are just not going to care. No matter what we do, they will just not be compassionate. But sometimes we can move them to exhibit compassionate behavior by making the business case for them, right? What, like you said, what is important to them, and how will this get them what's important to them? So, yeah.
All right. So the next question I want to ask it goes back to Rhonda, what you were talking about with data analytics. When you look at the talent management process and the entire employee journey, what are some ways that data analytics can be incorporated to make that a more enjoyable process? And what are some of the things you have seen that have been implemented well and implemented not so well?
So a couple things. I mean, there's engaging employees before they even start. I've seen some federal agencies take a look at pre-onboarding, so to speak. So after that person gets that tentative offer letter, how are you engaging them? How are you hearing what's important to them in the workplace, right? Those are all data points. It doesn't have to be quantitative, send them a survey or whatever, but what are they saying to you? What are you hearing? And then continuing that all along the journey. Are you embedding in the onboarding process? Normally we think, oh, you know, new hire orientation, that's one day. No, that's an entire process, right? And it doesn't start or stop the day the person joins the organization. So who do they have to go to when they're thinking, feeling something? How do they get that out and up? And then who was it? Maybe it was Jason as well, who talked about, as leaders, we should be reaching out and touching base with our employees and just, hey, what's happening? You can learn a lot of stuff in a conversation by just talking to folks and not even about their work. And so all those, again, are data points. And so making people realize that data analytics doesn't have to, there are various forms of it. And it doesn't have to be as formal as somebody doing a research study. Yeah, that's part of it, but there are other ways you can get data from employees, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're sensing, with their feeling and sensing, and how do you use that to make the work experience a better place?
Any other thoughts? Anybody want to expound on that? So Alade, let me ask you, for clarity, let's say you have a large span of control. How do you scale your message so that it is clear and understood throughout the people that are within your span of control?
You really have to communicate at all levels. You communicate um, with your senior managers, with your supervisors, and then with your employees, and be consistent with your message. And I think that's, that's one of the things that I have been seeing, that we will only send things to a certain group, and sometimes that group is not disseminated any further. So then whatever clarity you provided to that first layer, it's not going anywhere else. So you really need to make sure that you are reaching everyone either at the same time or with the same message at different moments.
And Mike, when you think about organizational resistance, if an organization says, we're challenged for resources, what's the one thing we can focus on first to start to build a resilient organization? What would be some of your thoughts?
I would say, again, it's a narrative. I would focus on the communication part, and crafting, making sure that the narrative explains the purpose and how that purpose is captured in the mission and how that cascades down to the job. It doesn't take any additional resources to do that. We are programmed, our brains are programmed by stories primarily. And the narrative of that organization at that time, and explaining why we do what we do, promoting successes and wins as examples of model behavior, great behavior, peak performance, and pointing out things where there are opportunities to improve. Just that, unrelenting communication around why we're here and why we do what we do. I think there's a lot of return to be had just by hammering the communication and staying in touch with people. And by the way, it's not a one-way communication, as has been said. It is multi-pronged, and it's especially important that your leaders understand the overall message and can personalize that for their particular team and make it more relevant for their particular team.
Question for all panelists. Do you have any tips or suggestions on what strategies to utilize on your first 90 days in a management role? And I will start off by saying, buy the book, First 90 Days, or First 90 Days in Government. So I hope I didn't steal anybody's thunder, but feel free to jump in, anybody. Going once?
Well, I put something in the chat, and I said, one, be authentic. People know when you're just trying to pass something off and when you really feel it. So you have to be your authentic self. And then do you have anyone you look up to as a manager? What is it they do that resonates with you? And 3, I said, listen to your employees more than you talk. And when you talk, and they respond, hear what they're telling you and take action whenever you can.
I'll add to that sort of builds on that, but my experience has been, in the first 90 days, you should ask lots of questions, do lots of listening, focus on building relationships, and don't try to fix anything yet. Because oftentimes the thing that seems obvious to you is probably not nearly as obvious as you think. Sometimes it is. Keep your notes, but just give yourself a little time, because sometimes we want to add so much value so quickly that we forget to give ourselves time to really understand what's going on.
And I'm going to jump in here. So I used to work at the VA, and when I left to go to another agency, my boss pulled me aside and he said, when you do the assessment, like Jason said, you also need to always ask your boss, what's the one thing that's keeping you up at night critically? Because there may be something you need to do immediately. what I've often found is by talking to add on to what Rhonda and Jason said, talk to employees, but talk to all stakeholders. And for me, I gather data with two questions for whatever agency, division, whatever. Who are we? Who should we be? And you just let people talk, and that will tend to tell you exactly everything you need to know about what goes well, what some of the challenges are, and then you just tend to follow up. So it's a good way of gathering data and also putting yourself in a position where by day 91, where I say the first 90 days you're treading water, when day 91, when you're ready to start swimming to shore, you have data as a part of your plan, and then you can strategically articulate what success should look like. Next question for Rhonda. There was a McKinsey study where they did a case study on an insurance company. And what they found was they implemented a bonus program that didn't work. And then when they utilized data and drilled down, they found they were having retention issues with smaller groups, and those smaller groups had lower rated managers. So when you are looking at utilizing data, qualitative, quantitative, informal, formal, how do you determine what's right and how's not? Where do you stop from just going data down a rabbit hole?
See, you would ask me that question because I have gone down some of those rabbit holes. I think
Right. And I waited till the end to ask you, because that's what I do.
Thank you. So the first thing I talked about, right, is what is the question? What is the issue that you're trying to solve? And that can sometimes keep you focused, right? And so in the case of this compensation system, and they found, you said that it wasn't working, and the folks it wasn't working with, had terrible managers. So what were they, and retention suffered, right? So one, from the data and just all the research is out there, they should have known that bad managers lead to higher rates of attrition. So that should have been a no-brainer for them. So they should actually have been looking for those things as they were sifting through the data. So I would say, when you see those things, you said, how do you kind of use the data and not go down that rabbit hole? Stay focused on what the question is, but also it's okay to just explore the data and what is it telling you, right? But it needs to lead back to something that can make a difference. And I would say if they found that out, then the next question would be why, right? Because something's going on, but you don't necessarily know why. And so that leads you to, all right, who can I ask? Employees, supervisors, whatever. What is the other data that I need in order to address that issue? So that probably didn't answer your question in a coherent way, but those are some of the pieces I would think about.
And next time I'll ask that question sooner as opposed to later on. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, looking at the time, I'm going to ask the panelists to just give their final thoughts as we wrap up. And I will start off with Alade, then Mike, then Rhonda, and then Jason.
So my final thoughts, and basically when on providing clarity, when you don't have the answers or the information is constantly changing, be okay to be vulnerable, be okay to not knowing, be candid, and it's always going to be important to be honest about where things stand. As leaders, we're not always going to have all the answers, so have some grace for yourself. Thank you.
My thoughts with respect to resilience is to keep a service mentality, a service mindset, really reminding ourselves what we're there for. In the federal government, public service is the moniker, and private sector companies make a big deal, and as well as nonprofits, service is the deal. So we find ourselves able to keep going, to push through, and to live to fight another day when we're doing it for something greater than ourselves. And those would be my final thoughts.
I think you had me as next. And so my final thoughts are back to just in terms of we have the opportunity to create a new type of workplace that we see is just so needed because of everything we've been experiencing. And guess what? There's probably going to be a year worse than 2020, and we don't know when that's going to come. So shaping our future, doing it in a thoughtful way, doing it compassionately, building resistance, being willing to be open and vulnerable and communicate. We have to be grounded in those areas in order to build that workplace of the future.
My, I guess, parting thought is that it can be tempting to think that we're, because the vaccine's here and a variety of things, that we're sort of towards the end of the well-being crises. And I think it's just beginning. And so I think this work is as urgent today as it has been ever before. And I shared a link to a post that a piece that Adam Grant published in New York Times this week, where he introduced this idea of languishing as being sort of the mental health space between kind of flourishing and depression and burnout. It's something in the middle where you're not necessarily, it gave word to something that I like, he nailed it, that there's something there. And I think a lot of times we call those people disengaged. And I don't know that they're disengaged, they're just struggling, right? Their well-being is diminished. And so they're going through the motions, not because of anything broken necessarily at work, but things are broken in their well-being. So this is serious work that I think we all need to double down on. And if we do, I think we can create an entirely different and better future of work.
And I will say, Jason's heard me say this before, this is really the moment of truth for HR. I mean, there's been a lot of when things are going well, it's really easy to be an expert. It's really easy to get engagement scores up or meet some type of goals when things are going well. But when things are going bad and people have real needs and they're leaning on people or things other than themselves, this is really the opportunity for organizations to really show their expertise and meet that moment of truth. What I was hoping to accomplish today was to have a different group than the same old future of work people or the same old government people or government contractors saying something they probably written 2 or 3 years ago. So I want to thank this panel for coming and sharing their thoughts. And again, thank American University Key Program, Lamont, Patrick, the incandescent Jennifer Tether, wherever she is, for allowing this time, and for everybody here who participated. There's, Jay-Z said you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate it. Please use the links, reach out to these leaders and these experts, and thank you everybody for your time.